Margaret stood outside the Grand Hotel ballroom, holding a small gift wrapped in silver paper. Inside, her only son, Daniel, was getting married. She had spent months preparing for this day. She had helped choose the flowers. She had gone with Sophia to 3 different dress shops because Sophia couldn't decide between 2 gowns. She had stayed awake until 2 in the morning sewing a tiny loose button onto Daniel's wedding suit when he came home from the rehearsal dinner. She had even kept a little notebook filled with everything that needed to be remembered: the florist, the photographer, the seating arrangement, the rings, the music, the emergency sewing kit. She had thought of everything, because this wasn't just Daniel's wedding. It was the day Margaret had imagined since the moment her son was born. She had raised him alone after his father died when Daniel was only 6. There had been years when money was tight, years when Margaret worked extra shifts and came home exhausted, years when she pretended she wasn't hungry so Daniel could have the last piece of chicken. She never complained. Whenever Daniel asked why she worked so much, she always smiled. Because you're worth it. Daniel had grown into a good man. And when he proposed to Sophia, Margaret had been genuinely happy. Sophia was kind, smart, warm. She treated Margaret with respect. During the wedding planning, Sophia had often told her, "I hope one day I can be half the mother you are." Those words meant everything to Margaret. So when she arrived at the hotel that morning, she had been carrying more than a gift. She had been carrying 27 years of memories. But now, 20 minutes before the ceremony, a security guard was blocking her from entering. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. Margaret stared at him. "This is my son's wedding." "I understand. Then why can't I go inside?" The guard looked uncomfortable. "I was told not to let you in." Margaret's smile disappeared. "By whom?" He hesitated. "Mr. Collins." Her heart sank. The bride's father, Thomas Collins. Margaret had met him twice. He was wealthy, polished, and intimidating. During the rehearsal dinner, he had barely spoken to her. She had assumed he was simply nervous about the wedding. Now she wondered if she had been wrong. Margaret looked through the glass doors. Guests were walking inside. She could see Daniel's cousins, his college friends, his co-workers, Sophia's relatives. Everyone was dressed beautifully. Everyone was smiling. And somewhere inside was Daniel, her son, the boy she had raised alone. The boy who used to climb into her bed whenever thunderstorms frightened him. The boy who once gave her a crayon drawing and said, "When I grow up, I'm going to buy you a mansion." She had laughed. He had been 6. Now he was getting married. Margaret looked down at her dress. It was a simple navy dress. Elegant. Conservative. She had chosen it because Daniel once told her, "Mom, you look beautiful in navy." She had pinned a small silver brooch to the collar. Daniel had given it to her when he was 12. She touched it gently. The guard shifted his feet. "I'm really sorry." Margaret swallowed. "Did Daniel tell you not to let me in?" "No." "Did Sophia?" "No." "Then who did?" "Mr. Collins." Margaret's voice became quieter. "Why?" The guard lowered his voice. "He said you weren't dressed appropriately for the ceremony." Margaret almost laughed. She looked at herself. There was nothing inappropriate about her dress. It was the dress her son had asked her to wear. She looked through the glass again. "I'm his mother. I know. I helped pay for this wedding. I know. I have a seat inside. I know." Margaret looked at him. "Then what exactly am I supposed to do?" The guard looked away. "I was told you couldn't enter." Inside, the musicians began playing. Margaret's heart stopped. The ceremony was starting. Her son's wedding. Without her. She looked at the silver-wrapped gift in her hands. Inside was a watch. She had saved for months to buy it. On the back, she had engraved, "To my son, you were my greatest beginning." She had planned to give it to him after the ceremony. Now she didn't know if he would ever see it. Margaret stepped away from the doors. For a moment, she considered leaving. Maybe that would be easier. She could drive home, put the gift on Daniel's kitchen table, tell herself she hadn't wanted to make a scene. She could disappear quietly. She had become very good at disappearing quietly. Then she heard a voice behind her. "Margaret." She turned. A tall man in a black tuxedo was walking toward her. Thomas Collins. He looked confused. "What are you doing out here?" Margaret stared at him. "I was told I couldn't enter." Thomas frowned. "Who told you that?" "The security guard." "Why?" "He said you instructed him." Thomas's expression changed instantly. "I instructed him to do what?" "To keep me outside." Thomas looked at the guard. "Who gave you that order?" The guard pointed toward another security employee. Thomas's face hardened. "I never gave that instruction." Margaret looked at him. Then why am I standing outside? Thomas didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the ballroom. Then he looked back at Margaret. Come inside. She shook her head. Maybe I shouldn't. Why? She looked toward the ballroom. If your family doesn't want me there. Thomas interrupted. My family doesn't get to decide whether Daniel's mother attends his wedding. Margaret looked at him. You don't understand. I understand enough. He stepped closer. Margaret, if someone intentionally kept you outside, I want to know who and why. She hesitated. Please don't cause trouble. Thomas's expression softened. Trouble was caused when they made you stand outside. He extended his hand. Come with me. Margaret stared at his hand. Then she looked at the ballroom. The music was still playing. She could hear guests settling into their seats. She could imagine Daniel waiting at the altar. She slowly placed her hand in Thomas's. They walked through the doors together. The moment they entered, conversation stopped. Dozens of people turned. Margaret felt every eye on her. Some guests looked surprised. Others looked uncomfortable. One of the bridesmaids whispered something to another. Margaret wanted to disappear. Thomas didn't let go of her hand. He walked her straight toward the front. Then he stopped. Where were you supposed to sit? Margaret pointed. Second row. Thomas looked at the empty chair. He pulled it out. Then that's where you're sitting. Margaret sat. Thomas sat beside her. The music continued. A few seconds later, Daniel appeared at the end of the aisle. He was smiling. Then he saw his mother. His smile disappeared. His eyes widened. He looked at Thomas. Then Margaret. Mom. Margaret smiled through tears. I'm here. Daniel immediately started walking toward her. What happened? Margaret shook her head. It's okay. No. He looked at Thomas. Why was my mother outside? Thomas stood. Because someone told security she wasn't allowed inside. Daniel's face changed. Who? Nobody answered. Thomas looked around the ballroom. I was told the reason was that she wasn't dressed appropriately. Daniel looked at his mother. He stared at the navy dress. Then at the silver brooch. Then at the gift in her hands. His eyes filled with anger. Mom, he whispered. I didn't want to ruin your wedding. Daniel shook his head. You couldn't ruin this. Then he turned toward the entire room. My mother was standing outside while I was about to get married. His voice trembled. She raised me. Nobody spoke. She worked 2 jobs when I was growing up. He looked at Margaret. She gave me everything she had. Margaret whispered. Daniel, please. But he wasn't finished. If anyone thinks she's not good enough to sit in the front row, then they can explain that to me. The room became completely silent. Then the bride appeared at the end of the aisle. Sophia had heard everything. She walked toward them slowly. When she reached Margaret, she took her hand. I'm so sorry. Margaret shook her head. You don't need to apologize. Sophia looked toward her father. Then toward the guests. Yes, I do. She squeezed Margaret's hand. Because you're supposed to be here. Thomas nodded. She is. Sophia smiled through tears. She's not just Daniel's mother. She looked at Margaret. She is my family too. And for the first time that morning, Margaret felt like she belonged exactly where she was. Sophia smiled through tears. She's not just Daniel's mother. She looked at Margaret. She is my family too. And for the first time that morning, Margaret felt like she belonged exactly where she was. Daniel walked over and hugged his mother tightly. I'm sorry. Margaret held him. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have made sure you were inside. You were getting married. That doesn't matter. He pulled back and looked at her. You matter. Those 3 words hit Margaret harder than anything else that morning. For years, she had never asked for recognition. She didn't need praise. She didn't need expensive gifts. She only wanted her son to remember that she was his mother. Now he was standing in front of everyone, making sure she knew it. Margaret smiled. Then go get married. Daniel laughed through his tears. Yes, Mom. He kissed her forehead. Then he walked back toward the altar. Sophia followed. Before she reached the altar, she stopped beside Margaret. I'll see you after the ceremony. Margaret nodded. I'll be here. Sophia smiled. Good. The ceremony began again. This time, Margaret sat in the second row. Not hiding. Not embarrassed. Not wondering whether she was wanted. She watched her son promise to love Sophia for the rest of his life. When they exchanged rings, Margaret cried. When they said their vows, she cried harder. And when Daniel kissed his bride, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Margaret stood with everyone else. She clapped until her hands hurt. After the ceremony, guests surrounded the newly married couple, but Daniel kept looking toward his mother. Eventually, he excused himself and walked over. Mom. Yes. Come with me. Where? There's something I need to show you. He led her toward a quiet hallway. At the end was a small room. Inside sat several framed photographs. Margaret stopped. She recognized every one. Daniel as a baby. Daniel's first day of school. Daniel holding a baseball. Daniel beside his first bicycle. Daniel and Margaret at his graduation. Daniel at his first job. There was even a photograph of Margaret asleep at the kitchen table while helping him with homework. She stared at it. I thought I lost these. Daniel smiled. I kept copies. Margaret touched the glass. Why? Because you always thought I didn't remember. She looked at him. I never said that. You didn't have to. Daniel took a breath. I remember everything. He pointed to the photographs. I remember you working late. Another photograph. I remember you pretending you weren't tired. Another. I remember you selling your jewelry when I needed tuition money. Margaret's eyes widened. You knew? I found the receipt years later. She looked away. Daniel continued. I remember waking up and finding you asleep in the chair because you were waiting for me to come home. Margaret wiped her tears. I wasn't always a good mother. You were. I made mistakes. So did I. I couldn't give you everything. You gave me everything that mattered. Margaret looked at her son. Then why did you let me think I wasn't wanted here? Daniel's face fell. I didn't. I know. I never told anyone to keep you outside. I know. But I should have noticed. Margaret nodded. That would have been enough. Daniel hugged her again. Then he whispered, I love you, Mom. I love you too. When they returned to the reception, Thomas Collins was waiting. He looked serious. Margaret. She turned. Yes. I owe you an apology. You don't. I do. He glanced around. I made a terrible assumption. Margaret frowned. What assumption? Thomas hesitated. I thought you were trying to make the wedding about yourself. Margaret stared at him. I wasn't. I know that now.